minutes, because I do think just after the presentations that we heard, I think it's in terms of digesting and processing that. I am going to open the floor to anyone, everyone, for any comments or questions that you might have to any of our speakers. And I guess for Emma, she dealt with the broad issues around patient public involvement in health research and the seldom heard voices within that, from the network and community perspective, over to Lucia, who dealt and shared with us some real practical issues and applications and learnings, and then through to Andy, who's looking at that truest form of co-production. So if you want to just throw your hand up, or indeed you can just stand up if you really want, but we're very open to taking comments or questions from the floor. Well, nobody? We've one here. Anna.
And I think, I do have the microphone. Just to say, I mean, the word power came up in all three of the presentations, and I think it's I think there's two words that are really, really important. The first one is equality, because I think what we're talking about, because we've all done it, and I'm owning this for our own organisation as well over the years, this sense of, well, aren't we great to be including people who use drugs, or isn't it a great thing to do like that? That day is gone. This is about equality. It's absolute equality. And again, as Andy was saying in particular, recognising that is expertise, because again, we still do have this very limited use of the word expertise. And I think the second point I want to make, and I think it's crucial, and it's around that power thing. Again, a lot of the time research is being commissioned by or on behalf of agencies or services. And it is absolutely crucial that in doing that, in that engaging with people who use drugs, there's an acceptance and an openness to hearing critical comment. I think that is one of the places where we can fall down, that we want to hear the views until they become critical. And again, it's owning that from our own organisation. We would have probably been guilty of that as well at different stages. None of us likes to hear criticism. But in terms of social change and in terms of actually respecting the voices of people who use drugs, if we can't listen to critical comment, like it's the whole process is completely pointless. That is, who can tell us more about where we're going wrong, or the issues that need to change, not in a negative way, but in a way to try and bring about that change and inform it, than people who use drugs. So I think that's absolutely crucial, because I think sometimes, that openness to accepting critical comment and to seeing it as valid, it's not always there. And thanks again.
Thanks, Anna. I'm going to open that comment out to the panel. Is there anybody would like to respond or just add to Anna's statement or comment in it in any way? Emma?
One thing as well. I think part of it as well is making sure that people are comfortable enough and have built the relationships and the trust enough that those real conversations and those real honest conversations can happen. And that's something often that doesn't happen as well. It's kind of last minute, or we'll engage when we need you, and what we're really missing a lot of the time is those longer term building up of relationships, so that people really are working as peers together and can have debates where you disagree and you work out and you have honest conversations. I think it's a really good point.
I think I'd echo that, but also to say that I think another really important thing in terms of how research is commissioned is thinking about how you can involve people in the commissioning process. So I mentioned priority setting partnerships as an example of deciding what the research priorities should be, because quite often involvement happens unless it's peer-led. But again, I think with peer-led there's an issue which Andrew speaks about, kind of how you get that funded. But I think I was involved on in a funding panel recently around young people and mental health, where all of the applicants had to, as part of the application process, submit a young person's summary of their research. All of the research was reviewed by academic peer reviewers, but also by a panel of young people. And on the funding panel, where we were rating and voting for which projects should get funded, there were 3 young people involved in that process who had a fairly equal voice. and, you know, were able to give their perspective on each of the bids as well. And I think for me, that was really, really critical, because I think funders need to like involve people in deciding what the priorities for research should be, and involved in deciding how, you know, what research is funded. Because if you wait to the point where, like, you know, I think one of the things that struck me in that call is there were an awful lot of bids put in when people said, oh, we're going to do peer research, we're going to do co-production. But they hadn't involved any young people in the development of the proposals. There were no young people as co-applicants. And, you know, I think funders should, if somebody says they're doing a participatory piece of research or peer research, and there are no people with lived experience as co-applicants, that should be a kind of, you know, that should be a red flag.
Yeah, and I think just to add, like, you know, that's why I think we really do have to evaluate how we do some of this stuff, and we have to really say, look, do we focus and do we trust people and do we trust the process? Because sometimes it might seem like it's a risky move, but it's not really, and it might mean just saying, look, there's a particular project we know of that does really good work, and they're working with really good groups of people, and we're gonna fund them to do a piece of research. There'll be conditions, there'll be ethical conditions around it, but we have to sometimes, we have to be confident and trust people and really start from the ground up. You know, set up a team of researchers, set up a group of people and come up with a research question that's consistent with what's going on around, what's the issues and what's the needs. But, you know, we have to be willing to, even if it's only as a pilot, start up with some examples of where we just provide funding to a group who's extremely marginalised, who has extremely good knowledge, and let them shape it from the ground up. And I think if we do that, because there's examples of it happening and where we do it, it's groundbreaking.
Thanks, Andy, and thank you, everyone. Right, we've time for another question or comment. Yep, over we go. We have a mic on the way, sorry.
I'm the manager there. What I'm taking away from today is there's a real appetite for change and a real appetite for including those with lived experience in it. And, you know, I really do, but if our funders haven't got that same appetite and come along with us, then we're in trouble. So we really all need to be making sure that that happens. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, and I think a very, very valid point, because what we're hearing now is the practical applications and how we can go about doing that research, but ultimately there needs to be resources provided. We have one other question just up here. Sorry. And then we will close it down. I know you're moving. Brady.
Hey, good afternoon. John Bennett from Finglas Scarborough Local Drug and Alcohol Task Force. Just a question for the panel. Do you think that funders of research and even researchers themselves adequately take into account the resources and the cost of participation when they're framing, planning, putting together research projects? Because it's, in my mind, you know, it's often the last thing that's considered, you know. A lot of the technicalities around, I suppose, the academic expertise and one thing and another of maybe of the lead researcher, for want of a better word. But, and then I suppose people who do, if they do find people to support the involvement, like in Ireland, like a lot of youth involvement in most research on the ground in communities is supported by what we call in Ireland youth work, and people that do youth work, you know. And I often find from listening to people on the ground like that, like youth workers or voluntary community workers or whatever, there's very little acknowledgement of their role in a lot of this research in terms of how, you know, the research participants, you know, respondents, survey participants, you know, how they arrived there in the first place, you know. And I just wonder, you know, to the panel, is there much, you know, in your own mind, much consideration given to that?
I just come in there on your first point, John, was we've come across that a good bit. So we think that there's issues where we've had researchers come to us who want to do a piece of work, and as I said before, we're looking at a process where people are able to really develop their own analysis through their own lived experience, and that involves sessions, that involves group work, really strong process, but it does involve a little bit more resources and a little bit more time. And I know from our experience of working with researchers who are really fantastic and really, really good and believe in that stuff, they have a piece of research with a predetermined amount of money, and for them to shape it into the processes that we're looking to do is challenging and probably not realistic. So I think sometimes we're talking about being more realistic around what the process is, what the methods are, what it's going to take. But I think when we do that, we need to not just look at it in the monetary piece. It's like, what's the value? Like, we all want, because what we end up with is just research after research after research, where if we focused on a stronger process, we will get better outcomes, and the value for money will be there in the end.
And yeah, just to say, I think the short answer to your original question was no, I don't think generally with involvement people really give due regard to the resources needed, both in terms of people and expertise and funding. But I think in terms of the expertise of organisations, I think I veer more and more towards kind of talking about working with young people and organisations working with them, because otherwise you end up with a model where it's about people just kind of pick some more or less random young people and bring them into their academic institution or the organisation they're working with. And actually working with organisations who have established links with young people and communities is really, really key. And also it's really key for what happens after the involvement as well. You see too many examples of involvement or participative research where people are brought in and trained up and do this great project, and then it finishes and they're just kind of, okay, thank you, off you go. So I think working in partnership with community organisations and services, working with people, is really important for participative research to be done well.
Yeah, and I will just briefly add that actually some of our national funders actively excluded budgeting for it in the past. So it's not just, you know, the individual researchers. Some of the structures and systems in place actively prevented you from doing it. So hopefully they're changing, not the HRB. The HRB, promote funding appropriately. But yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that space, because there's a huge amount of hidden costs as well as the obvious costs, and too often they're not budgeted for.
Okay, folks, we're definitely out of time at this, but I would just like to thank Andy, Lucia, and Emma just for their presentations this afternoon. I'd like to thank all of you, our questions and comments that came from the floor too, just to involve the conversation and evolve it a little further, which you can continue during the afternoon with our presenters as well. So listen, thank you all very much. We have about 2 minutes, I've been told. 2 minutes of a toilet break, stretch your legs break, and then you're back in for the final session this afternoon. So just a round of applause for our presenters.